Hello, everyone. It's right at noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Larissa DeLuna, and I'd like to welcome you to the American Heart Association's Cardiac Boot Camp series. This is our second webinar in a 7-week series. For a full list of the upcoming webinars, visit www.heart.org/SWA quality. Before we get started, we'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. To avoid background noise, all lines have been placed on mute. For questions, you can either unmute your line by pressing *6 or type in the Q&A section of WebEx. Attendance of this webinar will earn you 1 CE credit. Instructions to claim your credits will be sent after the webinar. Today's topic is building your program and utilizing feedback. Our speaker is Laura Douglas. Laura has worked in medicine for the last 19 years. She began her training in the U.S. Navy Hospital Corps, where she worked as an emergency medical technician in both the emergency department and in the field. In 2004, she attended the cardiovascular specialist program at the Navy School of Health Sciences in San Diego, California. After graduation, she worked in the cardiac cath lab until 2015, when she transitioned into a new role as the first STEMI program coordinator for Presbyterian Health Services in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Presbyterian is a multi-facility organization with a total of 1,188 patient beds. Laura spends her free time volunteering for Cibolo Search and Rescue, a local organization dedicated to locating and rendering aid to those missing or injured in the wilderness. At this time, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Laura.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. She's already introduced me pretty well, so there go half my notes. We're going to go ahead and get started then. My background, I'm not sure if we covered that. I'm an RCIS, and that stands for Registered Cardiac Invasive Specialist for anyone who's not familiar with that, and Six Sigma Certified Green Belt. I don't have anything to disclose. I'm kind of not a big deal, so we'll just skip right over that slide. So this will be our agenda for today with some of our goals outlined. I have to read this to you guys in order to get you the CEUs that you require. We're going to talk about the origins of feedback, the different types of feedback, the significance of feedback, tips for accepting feedback, and tips for giving feedback. So what is feedback? This is going to be a brief history lesson. For anybody who was right on time and kind of geeked out by the origin of words, you're going to love this part, but it will allow anybody else that's late to join in and not miss a lot. The term feedback was coined in 1860 during the Industrial Revolution. It was used to describe the way the outputs of energy, momentum, or signals were returned to their point of origin in a mechanical system. Later, in 1909, they began using the term to describe some of the coupling loops in an electronic circuit. And then a decade after that, feedback was being used to describe that recirculating sound loop in an amplification system. It's kind of like that ear-murdering, awful sound we've all been at some sort of high school auditorium function and covered our ears. Very loud. Sadly and unfortunately, it's kind of similar to our common day interpretation of feedback. We sometimes want to do the same thing. Sometime after World War II, the term was being used in industrial relations, so it's now a little bit more in the workplace. Unfortunately, its main goal was just to feed corrective information directly back to the source, the employee. There's a definition here, which I'm not going to read to you guys, but it's the literal definition for feedback. Below it, I've placed an image, and basically showing you guys, kind of unlike when it was used in industrial relations, feedback is very cyclical. It's not just what we're giving out, it's what we're getting in. And honestly, what we're getting in is very important. It's the very definition of our jobs. Our work stems from this, and our work becomes this. It's crucial. There's a lot of varying types of feedbacks, ways we get feedback, ways we give feedback. For the purpose of this talk, I'm just going to go ahead and break them down into two different main types. We have incoming feedback, and we have outgoing feedback. Some of the types of incoming feedback that we get are some of our registry data that comes back to us. A lot of our hospital leadership is usually very interested in this, kind of a report on how we're doing. We also get quite a bit of incoming feedback from our colleagues, and that can be multi-department, especially as STEMI coordinators. You guys are going to hear from probably the units, your cath lab staff, your cath lab doctors. You're going to hear from ER doctors, EMTs, just all over the place. Some great ways to get some of this feedback is doing things like job shadowing. When I started, I did ride-alongs with EMS, and every different crew that I got to ride along with, they had completely different obstacles from one to the next. I like to job shadow in the ER just to kind of see what their day is like. It's a whole different kind of crazy than we have in the cath lab upstairs, and it gives you a really good idea when you're coming up for process improvements. It gives you a good idea of what their flow is like off the bat. Helps you to look at their barriers. And I'll be honest, some of the best ideas that I get for how to make something easier and smoother and more efficient from the staff, or for the staff, it comes from the staff. They know their workflow better than you ever will, and they have the best suggestions. Also, going down there and meeting everybody, working a shift with them, riding along, it really helps build rapport, builds relationship, builds trust, and it just makes the transition more smoothly. Gets you known. People feel like they can come and talk to you, and it just opens a whole lot of doors for you as a STEMI coordinator. It is a time sacrifice, but I'll be honest, I don't think I ever had a moment of regret in doing that. One of the other things that we did for our colleagues is a lot of times people are afraid of mentioning something because they're afraid of the repercussions of it. They certainly don't want to type up an email that their name's attached to, and they may not even want to text you, may not want to call you, may not want you to know their name. So we created this thing called the Q card for the quality department, and these are questions, queries, quizzical cases, and whatever information you choose to get or not get, you could do something similar in your own area. The key about this is they can leave us their name if they want, or it can be anonymous. And when we started doing this, it literally tripled our awareness of events with patients that it didn't get dictated, or maybe there was an out-of-line doctor, or something that we could address and improve, and they just needed that forum to be able to go through it anonymously. We also just got a little cheapy lockbox, and only 2 of us have a key, and it's not one of the managers. It's myself and my other quality partner here. And so I think it just made them feel just a little bit more reassured. No one's going to recognize their handwriting. Like I said, it will require a little bit of triage. Like once those floodgates open, sometimes you'll get quite a few interesting things. Another incoming source of feedback is from our patients, and honestly our patients' families as well. This is a really great way to just stop and get their perspective, or what they perceived of their perspective. A lot of times we joke around the cath lab is seldom ever remembered because that's their sedation part of the procedure, but actually trying to see how they've pieced it together in their brains, if it was comfortable for them, if they felt frightened, if they got what they needed, and honestly talking to the family to make sure we went full circle to do the same thing. So one of the things that we do here, I'll track down our STEMI patients and catch them in rehab. And if you guys haven't had a chance to go visit one of your rehabs that your hospital feeds into, this is an amazing thing to do. It's completely rewarding because you're watching them start to build strength after a really scary time during their life. When I was pregnant, I couldn't work in radiation, and I worked in cardiac rehab for a while. And these people would come in terrified that they were going to die. They've just had a very scary event in their life, and it was so wonderful to watch them build up over that time. Some of them would leave saying it was the best shape they had been in since high school, but just a really neat, upbeat, reassuring time. So I'll catch them there, and we do these STEMI stories, and I basically have interviews with them, and there are things that they would like to share with the staff that cared for them. There are things that they would like to share with other patients that are going through something like this. And we publish these stories, and we put them on the boards in our hallways, and we put them out in our newsletters. And, of course, if you guys do something like this, make sure you do all of the required media releases just to protect yourself. But it ended up being a great follow-up with the staff. You know, we don't see them after they leave the hospital. We don't get to see that wonderful side of them getting stronger all the way and getting better all the way. But then the ones that were in the hallway were, there's so many stops from patient family members and even sometimes patients. They're stopping to read these stories. And they were just great stories of awareness and encouragement to our other patients and their families. So it was a great idea to share. And certainly you'll be able to pull out some process improvement tips just from visiting with these people and talking to them about their experience. So now when it comes to outgoing feedback, some of the things we do here, a lot of the people on your team are going to be working clinically, and it's really hard to drag them physically into meetings when you have some of them on night shifts, some of them on day shifts, some of them are in surgery. And so we tried to look at different resources for getting the information out to everybody the best that we could. And we do a monthly report, of course, and this is our monthly STEMI report, and I kind of call this passive education, which we'll touch on a little bit later, but you're basically telling them what the goals are and then showing them what the actual numbers are without telling anybody that they're messing up. And it's a great way, like I said, people can get into their email at their own leisure. Some of these are printed and put up in departments where they know that it's hard for employees to access their email. But it's just basically a slideshow of how we've done the last month. And, I mean, if you look closely at this, you can tell there's some areas where we need some love, where we're struggling. But it's good. It's a way of spreading awareness without spreading negativity, and keeps everybody in the loop. Another form of outgoing feedback, and this is everybody's favorite, if you guys don't have something like this, I would strongly recommend that you consider building something similar to this. It's literally the patient feedback from the STEMI, from the case, and it's what I get the most feedback on, is people thanking me, oh my gosh, it's so nice to see this, it's so nice to see how they did, all of those things. And you can structure it in many different ways. Honestly, this slide that's here, I used PowerPoint to build it. I used the timeline that can be added into PowerPoint. But the layout of it, I got off of a STEMI coordinator PowerPoint that I found somewhere on AHA's website. It was a beautiful thing. Very valuable, though. And, again, you're passively educating people. You've put your goals on the page so they know that the time that they fell into is falling out. And I'll be honest, a lot of times, especially our EMS staff and your onboarding kind of constant turnover ER staff, they don't know about this. So it's a great way to share it and just spread awareness. One of the more helpful tools was actually using the timeline, because especially on cases that don't make it or you just missed it by a couple minutes, you can literally see where we could have cut minutes, how long it took to activate the cath lab, and now the cath lab has to drive here. How long did EMS have them in the field? How long did the ED have to hold on to them until the team got here? So it's a really good way of kind of painting a picture for everybody. And like I said, they love having the story completed. It's a giant teaching tool. Our EMS department here, they'll post them in their hallway, and they blank out the names so that all of the other EMTs that weren't involved in the care can see it. But they'll post them in the hallway, and there's new EMTs up there looking. They're studying the EKG. We try and circle where the ST elevation is and point out where the blockages are for people who aren't used to maybe seeing the EKG or looking at coronaries under fluoro. And although it seems tedious, we kind of put their signs and symptoms and medical history and even the meds that were given, because it's kind of sequencing the events, the things that we need to look for. And then when we've identified it, what are some of the meds that we can expect in the ER or EMS? And it's a passive way of teaching. It's a great way of teaching. Another way of teaching, and I don't know if any of you guys have been in the lab long enough we used to call them false activations, which they've kind of recently changed to activation without intervention. And they did that to take away that kind of negative, chastising feeling that's associated with you messed up. Obviously, we want people to err on the side of caution, and we expect these to come through. But then there's other opportunities where we can actually learn something or teach them something. And so we treat this as a good position to educate versus be punitive. And I'll be honest, chastising somebody won't fix the problem. But actually sitting down and helping to clear up confusion in a positive way, it generally, it's learned. It's kind of like the teach a man to fish or give a man a fish. Same basic principle. And we ended up kind of, just to track ours, we used to have a lot of activations without intervention. We call them OWIs for short. And so we ended up having to group them into different categories. There were ones that came to the cath lab, and maybe it was Takasubo, so we had, came to CVL. And then within the ones that don't come to the CVL, well, some of these are patients that expired in the ER that we were activated for. Some of these were patients that refused consent. They had a DNR, DNI, or maybe they were just a really poor candidate. They had a GI bleed or something really bad going on. The ones that we can teach on and help somebody grow, we call those opportunities for learning. And so that's an OFL, AWI, or we call it an awful OWI. So the significance of feedback. As I mentioned before, this is our job. This is where your work's coming from, and it's going to be your output work as well. Feedback is in so many different forms, and it's a huge part of our positions. So there is a book that I learned about that I want to share with you guys. It's called Thanks for the Feedback, and it's an absolutely hysterical book. It's a great read, but moreover, this has made, for me personally, the biggest difference in my job. Very life-changing for me. Basically, you're learning how to receive feedback. And in this Harvard negotiation project that they used as the basis for this book, they had taken a look at all the different parts of feedback. And the most impactful part that you could alter or change is actually how feedback is received, which most of the time is us. And so just kind of changing your demeanor, looking at a bunch of other things really helps. But I would strongly recommend, even if you just skim through this book, to take a look at this book. It won't just help you in your job, it will help you in life in general. It's an incredible book. So the overall goal and significance of feedback is improvement. We want to see growth, we want to see success, we want to see morale improve, we want to see progress, all of these things. So that's what we're headed towards, and change. And it really, honestly, in order to get there, to this point of improvement, you have to be absolutely honest with yourself, even when it's unfavorable. Sometimes we have, I had showed you guys the reports where it's not all great. And senior leadership, I'm sure, will furrow their brows, but you're working towards getting better. But if you're not honest, you won't address the problem. For example, I've done Weight Watchers for many years, and my start on Weight Watchers, I may not have been very honest with myself. And if I were to take that delicious-looking cherry cheesecake chocolate wonderfulness on the screen, and because it looks better, just chart cherries and track myself for a fruit serving for the day, well, at my 1-week weigh-in, I'm going to be awful disappointed. And it's the same way with our STEMI data, our STEMI materials, and reporting change. If you don't get down to the root of the problem and be absolutely honest with it, you're not going to see that change. And it won't get better. It just becomes a series of trying to kind of swipe something under a rug. So I have some helpful tips, things that I've learned for accepting feedback. So this is on our end. This is straight out of the book that I mentioned. This is interesting. When we give feedback, we notice that the receiver isn't good at receiving it. When we receive feedback, we notice that the giver isn't good at giving it. It makes me snicker, but it's very true, and that has a lot to do with our perception on being corrected, essentially, or being told that something we did didn't quite cut the mustard. Some of the things that you're going to want to do in your job is to actually change the culture of feedback from a push to a pull. You want this feedback coming towards you. So some of the feedback-seeking behaviors that we can have to make it more of a pull is to make sure that you're creating a non-intimidating environment. Listen to them fully, even when you don't agree. I know that we've all heard somebody telling us either a rumor or just a frustration, and you can tell they're venting and you don't want to hear it, or you think they're off base. Listen to them fully. Be receptive. Consider why they're sharing this with you. Even in the event that it seems to be off base to you, sometimes it ends up being more of a morale issue than a process issue. And a morale issue is still an issue that still will impact the overall flow. And there's still things that can be done about that. Dedicate yourself to hearing and understanding. I think it's very natural that the first thing that we do when somebody's bringing us negative news is we're already thinking of a response or an explanation. It's really important to set that aside and make sure that you're hearing everything and understanding what they're saying. Even if you have to kind of repeat back to them, this is what I'm getting from you. And in the back of your mind, just remember that because you're getting bad news doesn't mean that you're doing a bad job. So before you know it, if you're able to achieve this kind of environment, people realize they can come to you, and we start working towards change. And before you know it, you have a lot of people coming to you and working towards change, or just a lot of people venting to you, which happens too. There's sometimes I just have to close my office door and just let a cardiologist unload, and that's okay. When this starts to happen and you started to move from a push to a pull, you're going to need to start triaging. I don't know if you guys were on last week, but Casey had talked about when you start building your role as a STEMI coordinator, it's kind of slow going at first. You're kind of wondering, what should I be doing, projects I could be doing, and then before you know it, floodgates are open, and everybody wants data from you, information from you, wants to tell you about something, and so you really do have to triage the work, and it's not so different than the triage that we're used to for our emergency system. There will be things that you have to immediately address, things that people will start to forget about if you let a span of time go across. There are things that can wait. There are things that are minimal, and then things that, when I say expectant, these are the ones that they're just kind of dead. This person is just unloading, venting. I don't know that there's a process change that I can do here. And you're going to have to kind of sort through those things, and you may shift them around as you deal with these things more often and more often. So helpful tips for giving feedback. Now, I may not have to tell all of you, you might have noticed, but when it comes to the emergency department, invasive cardiology, even emergency medical technicians, they attract, those job fields attract a lot of type A personalities. Now, all of the personality types are in there, but type A's are, well, they're special. And I'm going to be honest, I'm probably in part somewhat of a type A personality. My coworkers would tell you that I have serious organization issues. So the traits that we associate with type A, which it makes me sad to read, are they're impatient, they're very competitive, they're work obsessed, they're achievement oriented, they're aggressive, and they tend to be very stressed. And I got to tell you, I looked on a lot of sites to find different common type A traits, and they're all like this. We associate it with such a negative thing. What they don't point out, and I did finally find, is that there are some huge strengths in these very strong personalities. Type A people like to take on challenges. Type A people, they are competitive, but that can be a benefit. Type A people tend to keep charging through. They don't get discouraged as easily. They tend to be a little bit more productive. They tend to be very goal-oriented, which has a lot to do with the type of work that we would do as a STEMI coordinator, and they will go in and battle for something that they think is important. So it's important to actually look for these strengths and use their strengths. I put this here kind of in regards to the Harvard study, but there's a quote at the bottom, and for those of you who aren't on the computer, I'll read it. There is an assumption that what motivates people to improve is the realization that they're not as good as they think they are. But in fact, it just makes them go find people who will shine that light on them. It may not be having the intended effect at all. And that's true. We've all worked in medicine. We've all been through a really tough either nursing orientation or just starting out in your job, and we're really bad at kind of repeating the pattern of like chastising somebody and somehow that's going to get into their brain versus creating a non-intimidating environment and educating them and teaching them and building that confidence that they need. And it's true, if we're spitting negativity out at people and telling them that they're not doing a good job, they're going to turn us off. There's nothing to listen to. So again, kind of back to that passive education. In this case, I take some of the competitive spirit of my strong type A personalities, and I've literally, before people knew who I was and I had rotated through the ER, I used to just turn my badge around backwards and listen. And I could tell the EMTs were reading my feedback because they knew that they had 10 minutes on scene. That was a desired goal from when they had contacted the patient. And I could literally hear one of them say that, like, yes, we were 9 minutes on scene. And I'm secretly, like, doing a dance around the corner, like, yes, they care. It's great. So you're kind of passively educating them, giving them the goals, and it creates this competitive spirit. And not just that, but because you're completing that loop, you're just fostering involvement, and that's just a great thing with these communities. Same thing here, kind of as I mentioned before. We use setbacks, as an opportunity just to get stronger. We look at it as a positive thing, like this happened, and it brought awareness to something that we can do to make your job easier, that we can do to make things better for our patients. It's good it's good every time that these come up, even when there's a bad outcome, because it just presented you with an opportunity to get better. And that really is the best way to look at it, and that's the best way to share it with your staff. People don't generally take well to having their pride crushed. One of the most important things that you can do in your job is celebrate every small win. Never delay gratitude. Make it sincere, not generic. So if you're calling somebody out, somebody did a dynamite job on something, explain what was dynamite about it. it makes them feel recognized. It makes them feel special. And there's a saying that, hey, I actually learned in dog training, but it's totally true with people too, I swear. And it's that every animal will repeat a rewarded behavior. And we kind of live by that. When we do something right, we try really hard to celebrate. And sometimes it's as little as like an email to that person or that person and their superior just to kind of recognize them. Sometimes it's bigger when we've accomplished something as a team and we end up doing, a barbecue, just something to celebrate the hard work that people put in. A lot of times in healthcare we don't hear back unless it's really bad, and that kind of stinks. So it's always good to get good news back. The general endpoint of the feedback, the reason, we had talked about, of course, improvement, but what you want is engagement. You want engagement from everybody. And so I kind of put here the 7 steps of employee engagement. These guys need to feel valued. We need to have openness back and forth. We should be able to talk to them. They should feel comfortable coming to us. The feedback loop that we had talked about is very important. They need motivation, and some of that comes from gratitude. Some of that comes from recognizing how we can improve processes to make them less stressful for our employees. Managing differences, of course, ownership, so you don't have 10% of the people doing 90% of the work, and really trying to, conflict-free is kind of hysterical for all of us working in a hospital, but doing your best to minimize the conflicts that we're going to have in our jobs. I think getting through all of those things and kind of focusing on those things will help you as you build your teams, and hopefully help you guys be more successful with your patients and your staff. That's all that I have to present on feedback today, which I realize is a little bit short. Maybe I talked too fast. But if there are any questions or comments, I'm right here.
Thank you so much, Laura. Great presentation. So again, if you'd like to ask a question, you can press *6 to unmute your line. And then we do have a couple of questions online. So again, you can type them in WebEx if you have questions also. So our first question, do you use your AMI form for STEMI activations or for any cases that go into the cath lab? So I guess the forms that you share, do you use them for anything, for only STEMIs, or do you use those for anything that goes into the cath?
Oh, okay, that's a really good question. So the feedback form, I'm assuming you're talking about the one with the pictures on it, and the EKG, we do use it for. A lot of times I won't use it for clean cases because that would be an activation without intervention. I do get a weekly report, though, back to our staff so they know what the outcome of that patient was, that, it ended up being Takotsubo or whatever. So they at least have that closure. But in terms of, like, when you start balancing your workload, I couldn't build that for every one of the activations that came through. But I do use it for our NSTEMI cases, and I will use it for our cabbage patients. Even though we don't have a post picture, they can kind of see what that patient was going into the OR looking like when we do that. So I try to give it as much as possible just because, like I said, that timeline helps everybody. If they thought that it was a STEMI, then we would expect them to respond accordingly. And it just kind of shows them a picture of how long different parts took and what the cause and effect of that is. And it closes the loop, like I said, for those patients.
Perfect. We have several more questions. So where is the template for STEMI analysis you use again?
The template for STEMI analysis. Oh, okay. I know you're probably asking about that feedback form. So that actually came from, I think I had
it was an AHA presentation that you got it from?
It really was, and I have it printed in my drawer. I can certainly get it to you, and we can attach it to the email of these slides, the AHA presentation. But there were tons of helpful tools in there. That was just one that I took, and I rebuilt the form. I did not have the physical template, but certainly I can share where I found it.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll look also on our end. Do you provide the same type of feedback to your transferring hospitals, and if so, in what format?
Absolutely. The transferring hospitals get the same feedback form. If it's coming from a different hospital, obviously you would have maybe slightly different sections for your transferring hospital and then for your receiving hospital if you're detailing what's been done. But that closure is so important to them because they never hear back. A lot of them aren't even on the same medical record system that we are. So unless a cardiologist calls the ER doctor back, and even then sometimes just the ER doctor gets feedback, the nursing staff and the techs involved never got to hear what happened with that patient. So it is very helpful. And depending on how far your transfer hospitals are, it is super helpful for closing the loop with lytics. When we started lysing here, it's a lot of blood thinners that you're giving at the same time, and it frightens a lot of staff. And so they'll pick one or the other, and then we have a lytics fail case. And it's so important to be able to make people feel comfortable to circle back around and close that loop and see if there was something they didn't understand. And it opens communication. It comes right out from my email to those people. And so they've got my email and a way to get a hold of me if they didn't already from a transferring hospital. So absolutely, same form.
Great. And then we're getting several questions about the PowerPoint, if we could share that. And definitely when we get our recording and everything ready, we will send a link to the recording of today, a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, and then the information to claim your credits. So that will probably go out tomorrow or Monday, but definitely we'll be sharing a copy of the presentation. And then someone actually asked if you could go back and show the EKG and cath lab pictures again. I guess the form that you had.
Yeah, I can. Do I still have control? You have control.
Yeah, there you go, I think.
Okay. Let's come on back. Luckily, I put that slide in here twice.
There we go.
There you go. Hopefully you guys can all see it.
And then someone also wanted to know, like on this slide, how did you create that timeline at the bottom?
Okay, so that is a timeline add-on that I did have to, it's a free download, which is really nice. Now you can pay for fancier things, but I made this one work where I could just do the minutes, and then I changed the colors so I could show EMS and show the ED and show the CPL. But the flags were like the key indicators in the process, and those are all time-coded things. And so if you do a Google search on PowerPoint, timeline downloads, it's meant to work specifically with PowerPoint. It's a very helpful tool.
All right, it's a great way to visualize, a great visual for everyone. Let's see. Are there any questions on the phone line? You can press *6 to unmute. Okay, and someone also gave another tip that you can create a timeline in PowerPoint itself also, in case someone doesn't have access to download the one from Google, but they're saying there is an option for that also, and straight in PowerPoint.
Fantastic.
Yeah, *6 to unmute lines if anyone has any questions on the phone.
Well, this STEMI feedback form that you're using, or this, it looks more like a PowerPoint. You said you got that template from where again?
So it was, I did have to build it. It wasn't an existing template. Certainly, I could share a blank template if some of you guys want it, if you like the way that it's structured. But I had just kind of built it based off of an American Heart PowerPoint that I found online for the role of a STEMI coordinator.
Okay, yes, I would really appreciate you sharing the template.
Absolutely.
Yes, we can definitely do that.
And just as a word of caution, I'm sure you guys know when you build these and you send these out, be careful with your data on these, something I didn't realize at first, which of our emails were secure, which ones had to go send secure, maybe what I should blank out. Now we end up just using initials, and for EMS, because it's so hard for them to search, we give them a run number so they can easily pull their patient. So just be careful how you send these out, because if there's an identifier on there and it's going to somebody that's not in a secured email, then that could be very problematic.
Great tip on that, yes. Anyone else from the phone line? *6 to unmute. We don't have any other questions in the WebEx Q&A. But again, just as a reminder, we have another session next Thursday at the same time, so visit heart.org/FWA quality to register for that one if you haven't already. And then by Monday, you should receive an email that'll have some of the templates that we'll gather up to share with everyone, a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, and then the instructions on claiming your education credits for this session. Any other questions before we close out today? Laura, thanks so much for your presentation. It was great, and we really appreciate you.
Of course. Good luck, everybody. I know you're going to do a great job out there.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.